Tried to trim my beard today. It's out of control. It's too short now.
Gotta look good for the podcast
Got a face for podcasts.
and a voice for the written word.
All right.
Should we do this?
Yeah,
Let's
let's
just
do it.
go for it.
All right. Are we doing it right now?
hmm
Hello and welcome to the membership podcast inspired by the life and works of Wendell Berry, the Kentucky farmer and writer. I'm your host, David Johnson, and I'm sitting here with John Pattison. Hey, John.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
We have definitely not been talking for the last half an hour before starting to record. This is
It's
this
very
is just
natural.
like we got on the phone and now we're just gonna start talking.
That's right. What are we reading today?
We are reading a Christmas poem. We're reading a Christmas poem that I think may not necessarily be a December poem, but you have some good thoughts on that. This is one of Wendell Berry's Sabbath poems. It is from 1987. It is number 6, and it's the one that starts remembering that it happened once. And so we're just going to talk because it's the holidays as we record this and as it goes out. We just thought it'd be fun to talk about a Christmas poem written by Mr. Wendell Berry of Kentucky.
Yeah. So the Sabbath poems are a series of poems that Wendell Berry has been writing since 1979. It was the first in the Timbered Choir is the first year that he publishes these. He My understanding and based on things that he's written that he writes these on Sundays out on his farm, out on walks. They're kind of his reflection on like as a day of rest, as a reflection on the sacred and the way that the sacred is influenced and seen in the everyday, which I think that this poem does a really nice job of
hmm
describing. So the poems don't usually have a title. Actually, the Sabbath poems don't have titles. They're numbered by their year, and then just like you said, John, this is 1987, number 6.
Yeah, do you want to read it? Maybe read it a couple times. Uh, oh yeah, I suggested. Sorry, I do want you to read it. You have the nice reading voice. Um, but I did want to give people a heads up that in the second to last line, there is the word cited, Sighdted, cited, um, and it's spelled that way and not like you were cited for a ticket or cited like a building. Although I do like that it kind of reads that way. To cite something, SITE, is to fix or build something in a particular place. And as you can imagine, that actually fits kind of well too.
Yeah.
But so when you hear Dave read that, that's how it's written.
So this is the Sabbath poem from 1987, number 6. Remembering that it happened once, we cannot turn away the thought. As we go out cold to our barns toward the long night's end, that we ourselves are living in the world it happened in when it first happened, that we ourselves, opening a stall, a latch thrown open countless times before, might find them breathing there, foreknown, the child bedded in straw, the mother kneeling over him, the husband standing in belief he scarcely can believe, in light that lights them from no source we see, an April morning's light, the air around them joyful as a choir. We stand with one hand on the door, looking into another world that is this world, the pale daylight coming just before, our chores to do, the cattle all awake, our own white frozen breath hanging in front of us. And we are here as we have never been before, sighted as not before, our place holy, although we knew it not. I'll read it again. Remembering that it happened once, we cannot turn away the thought as we go out cold to our barns toward the long night's end, that we ourselves are living in the world it happened in when it first happened, that we ourselves, opening a stall, a latch thrown open countless times before, might find them breathing there, foreknown, the child bedded in straw, the mother kneeling over him, the husband standing in belief he scarcely can believe, in light that lights them from no source we see, an April morning's light, the air around them joyful as a choir. We stand with one hand on the door, looking into another world that is this world, the pale daylight coming just before, our chores to do, the cattle all awake, our own white frozen breath hanging in front of us. And we are here as we have never been before, sighted as not before, our place holy, although we knew it not.
Had you read this poem before?
I had not read it until you sent it to me last night. I read a number of Sabbath poems and some of the more recent poetry that Wendell has collected or published, although it's been several years since he's published like new poems. But this was my first time with it. How about you?
I had read it before. I've read, I think, all of the Sabbath poems, at least in the big collection this day, the collected in New Sabbath poems. I think it's possible he's published some others and chapbooks
Hmm.
maybe in the last couple of years. And I have at least one collection that I bought from the Berry Center, but I don't think I've read it. So yeah, so I had read this before. I had a vague memory of it, but definitely it had been a long time since several years too for me since I had really read it with a lot of intention.
So you had mentioned that you think it's a Christmas poem, but not a December poem. I'm assuming that's because of the reference to April Morning Light.
Yeah, I actually hadn't interpreted it any differently or even considered interpreting it differently until you and I were talking before we started recording. There's the line, excuse me, that says, the mother's kneeling, the husband standing. In light that lights them from no source we see, an April morning's light, the air around them joyful as a choir. And so I interpreted this poem as taking place in April.
Hmm.
And also, maybe this is somehow related to scholars who think that Jesus was born not in December, but maybe in April, or I think other scholars say maybe in the fall.
Hmm.
So I did not read this as a December poem where the December morning has the quality, like the light of this December morning has the quality of a spring light.
Hmm.
But that sounds like more how you read it.
It is. I experienced this poem as like a deep, dark winter poem. Like
Hmm.
that there is a transition in the poem from dark and cold into something lighter and warmer.
Hmm.
Um, and so I did after I read it last night, I did a little bit of like looking around just to see if there was a explanation for the April morning as a date when people maybe would have thought that Jesus was born, the historical Jesus. Um, I still think that it's like for me, it references a type of light, like a spring light that
Mhm.
is a little bit out of place in a December, like an early December morning. Um, but I like the ambiguity of it for sure. I think that in either case, there is a sense that something ordinary is being made more than extraordinary
Mhm.
by by this recollection, this remembering that starts the poem.
And I think that what you're describing, that transition from one thing to another, I mean that comes out elsewhere in the poem, including and in the fourth line, as we go out cold to our barns toward the long night's end.
Hmm.
So I think that's similar to what you're saying.
Hmm. So other than the reference to the April morning light, is there what else stood out to you as you read this again for just over the last couple days?
There are a number of things, and so the first one that I'll start with is actually just the very first line, remembering that it happened once. Like right from the start, it implies that it could happen again, that maybe has already happened again, maybe that it will happen again, and maybe it's even happening right now.
Hmm.
So you start from that place of remembering, but it opens up all of these possibilities for both, for the past, the present, and the future. Um, this is something we can talk about more in a little while, perhaps. But this is a story in Christian language. This is the story of the incarnation, um, and like this is the incarnation's effect on the imagination, which I think is just there's so much there to really ponder.
I really like that. I the this idea that is happening, that is has happened and could be happening again and again. I think I hadn't thought about before. I For me the thing that stood out to me is just this idea of that the poet that that's Wendell Berry. I feel like I don't want to like make this sort of like equation between Wendell Berry and the poet on the page like too strongly, but it feels like this is these are reflective poems for him. So I'm going to say that like I imagine Wendell Berry standing in this sort of threshold moment, like he's
Hmm.
standing on the door or he's standing at the latch to something that he's opened so many times before, and there's this kind of threshold liminal space that he is existing in, where on one side of it is just the everyday ordinary existence, but that he has on this morning brought, he's prepared for it and he's bringing something else to it besides just what is happening in that moment. And in that preparation has transformed the moment. And it doesn't have anything to do with anything other than things that he's done himself. That kind of, and so we're talking about like this is a it's a poem about a Christian tradition. Um, but I think that for me, this is one of the benefits of any sort of tradition or ritual is that it has the opportunity to regularly remind us that there is another way of experiencing the ordinary daily things that can imbue them with meaning just by
Hmm.
what we bring to it.
Yeah, I wrote down on the margins that our places can become thin places.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is how we choose to see our
Hmm.
places, how we choose to live in and be in our spaces. Yeah, it kind of stands in contrast to this idea that you have to go somewhere to experience a thin
Hmm.
place. Your own place can be that place where the veil between the sacred, the mundane and the sacred or sacred, like where that is just so the distance seems all of a sudden not that great.
Hmm. I also really like that. So there are references to these things that have happened over and over again. The latch that is thrown open countless times before, that we are coming, like the he's at this threshold looking in at his cattle, like he's done so many other times before. And that each one of those times was an opportunity for this kind of numinous, like holy moment. Um, but it probably wasn't every time. And
Hmm.
I think that like when we talk about stuff like this, or when at least when I think about stuff like this, like that it's okay that not every moment is imbued with the holy too. That's one of the things that I like about, for example, like in my tradition, in the like the of the church calendar, that there are these markers that help me remember,
Hmm.
that draw me into it. So I think one of the reasons why I like thinking about this as a December poem, even though like I think that the idea that this is an April poem and Wendell Berry's like looking back in time is also like a really compelling thing. But that he has brought some intention to this because of the season, and that has also helped transform this daily task into something more.
You make me want to believe that this is a December poem.
All right.
I I choose to now think of this as a December poem.
All right, should we wrap it up then?
Hey, did you bump at all on that word foreknown?
So I bumped up on a few things actually in
Hmm.
this poem. I really like I love I love Wendell Berry and everything that he has written. I did bump up on Foreknown, although I think I bumped up even more on the first person plural, the use of we and our throughout this poem. I don't. I'd be curious to actually have a little bit of a conversation with you about what you think he's doing with that. I looked at some of the poems, a few poems I like immediately preceding and like following this in A Timbered Choir. And he almost always uses first person, like he's always writing about I, and they're very reflective. And in this one, he says we, and he starts off that we cannot turn away the thought as we go out cold into our barns. And that feels that feels so clunky to me unless he's talking about Tanya. I don't understand who else he is trying to draw into this with the poem. So I'm curious how you read that.
Yeah, so I read that not as he's with someone else, but I read it as something special that is true of, or at least and true and available to farmers.
Mm,
Like so for me, like the key isn't the use of the plural we, but rather the plural barns. The barns is plural too. And so I think about this as like on one level, a way of articulating and acknowledging the holiness of the farmer's vocation. But then also by extension, I think acknowledging and articulating the holiness of whatever we're called to do. You know, farmers have actual barns, and some of us have metaphorical barns. That's how I read it in the plural. But you're right that it's unusual for him with the Sabbath poems.
no, I like that. I like that reading. I want to. It's helpful to kind of help me figure out a way to appreciate this a little bit more. I tripped up on we, especially in those opening lines, every time I read it. But you had asked about foreknown.
Hmm.
My experience with Wendell Berry as a religious person is that he's like spiritual but not religious, right? That he's writing these Sabbath poems because he's not going to church. That his church is the natural world. And this feels like this to me feels like a clunky theological concept in his mouth, I guess.
Hmm. I wasn't sure how to read it actually. Does the foreknownness mean that like scripturally Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, like this had been in the works,
Hmm.
that this morning was going to happen? Like that first nativity, that first Christmas was going to happen? Or does it get more to what you were saying that like he is going out with some intention? And so is there an extent to which he expects to find them there? So it's not a complete surprise.
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
know. So this is you can tell that these are unformed thoughts, but I that it felt significant, like the word felt significant in its place in the poem. It starts the line foreknown and then a colon,
Colon,
the
yeah.
child bedded in straw, the mother kneeling over him, the husband standing in belief he can scarcely can believe.
Yeah, I think that for me, this poem and like Christmas poems, like nativity poems in general, like walk this really fine line between just being too a little too saccharine, like a little too something, right? And those lines right there, I like are almost for me too on the nose.
Hmm.
Um, for I mean maybe this is just personal taste, but I like the type of poetry that I will like really, really want to dig into. Like these are lines that don't leave any kind of like interpretive room to kind of like have the reader bring their own person into it. Like this, it's very, very straightforward. Whereas some of these other things that we've been talking about, like I think one of the things that I love about poetry and then reading poetry with other people is that there's an opportunity to kind of have your minds changed or have two different readings that maybe are maybe even competing, but that and even in the that sort of competition can still be complementary because it's just this generative meaning making kind of thing.
Hmm.
So, and those lines don't they don't do that for me at least.
Yeah, they don't do it for me either for the same reasons. I will say, as a father, when he writes the husband standing in belief, he scarcely can
Hmm.
believe. I recognize that.
Yeah.
I recognize that from the birth, especially the birth of my first, not because I love Molly, my first child more than my second, but just it was my first time being in the presence of that kind of a miracle,
Hmm.
and I was overwhelmed with joy, and it's just so much. I couldn't believe what was happening, and the only response I had was just to weep with joy,
Hmm.
like. And so, as a father, that helped me with that particular
Yeah.
part of the line.
Yeah. I actually I do really like the father lines a lot. And even I think for me it is that sort of forenoon, the child bedded in the straw. Like it looks like a Hallmark Christmas card in my mind.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, in a way that like in a not awesome way.
Well, I'll confess that even though one of my favorite lines is "in light that lights them from no source we see,"
Hmm.
that's one of my favorite lines.
It's a beautiful line.
I will say that there was at one point in my mind, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of like I'm seeing Thomas Kincaid."
Mm,
That quality of light
yeah.
that is not fair to the poem.
Hmm. Did you have like favorite lines or images besides that one that you really
Yeah, there's
resonated
one in particular. The air around them joyful as a choir.
with? Hmm.
To me, that is so evocative. There's like a kind of effervescence.
Hmm.
What about you?
I love the way he ends the poem. The
Yes.
and we are here as we have never been before, cited as not before, our place holy, although we knew it not. I mean, I know we've already mentioned this a little bit, but this idea that the preparation of remembering that is helped along by tradition and ritual that can lead to a transformed experience that has nothing to do with anything other than what we bring to the moment. I think that's such a hopeful thing.
Hmm.
There's it's just yeah, I think it's just it's such a hopeful thing. Because it's available. I really and then I like the way that like the lines the way he does the lines cited as not before our place like that just
Hmm.
that line right there, even though there's a comma in between before and our place, like it's this Wendell Berry like theme of belonging to a specific part of the world, a piece of ground, and that it's holy. And the next line's holy. I really like what he did all the way. Like the way that he landed the plane is just really beautiful for me.
I think that this whole poem reminds me of actually of a line from his poem "How to Be a Poet," where he says that there are no unsacred places, there are only
Hmm.
sacred places and desecrated places. And I would imagine I've said this before on this podcast, but okay, so also as a person of faith myself, and somebody who believes very strongly in the importance of place, I believe that is one of my callings as a Christian is the resacralization of desecrated places.
Hmm.
And I think that that's what this poem does. Like it reminds us right from the start that we live now in the world in which it happened.
Hmm.
Like that to me, like the incarnation. So like any of the like the theologies, both old and new, that are dismissive of the material world. I've heard Christians say things like, "Oh, it's all going to burn anyway." Like, like just being dismissive of the material world. I think the incarnation makes that impossible.
Hmm.
Theologically, makes it impossible because we live in the world in which it happened. And then, as you said, Dave, getting to that end, we are here as we have never been before. It's like we're in the same place, but we're in that place in a very different way, sighted as not before. So we are seeing with fresh eyes. It's like was it Elijah or Elisha, like who prayed that like his eyes, like his servants' eyes would be opened to like the angels and the servants of God all around. Like the scales, like in like bringing now to Paul, like the scales have fallen from our eyes. We are seeing our own place like we haven't seen before. And our place is holy, even though we didn't know it.
Hmm.
Holy, not now holy, like it always was holy, although we knew it not.
Hmm.
Like in some ways, the place hasn't changed. In many ways, the place hasn't changed. It's our perception of that place. I think this is a poem about the resacralization of our places.
Yeah, and so I'm just thinking about how you started this conversation about going to that first line of remembering that it happened once, and how that calls to mind the possibility that it happened once and it will happen, it could happen again and again and again, and that the ending at the end of the poem is it happening to us today. Happening to Wendell Berry when he was experiencing like writing this poem, like after spending his morning doing chores, some cold Sunday morning. I like I said, I think that's such a hopeful idea that
Hmm.
that is that that kind of transformation, even if it's small, even if it's a little bit temporary, is a available on a daily basis, if with
Hmm.
just a little bit of preparation and intention.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have any final thoughts on it
I don't
before
have
we
any
kind of wrap
final
it up?
thoughts. I would love to hear you read this poem, though.
Okay, I'll do it. Um, I'll actually read off this really beautiful Christmas card that we got. I got mine today. Yours is in the mail because you and I are both supporters of the Berry Center, and they sent a really beautiful Christmas card today that has this poem. I'm not sure what type of printing this is, but it's on really thick cardstock and beautiful printing on the back. So if you, by the way, if you're looking for a place to do some end of year giving, uh, consider giving to the Berry Center. It's fun keeping in touch with their work throughout the year. So I'll read it off this beautiful card one final time. Remembering that it happened once, we cannot turn away the thought as we go out cold to our barns toward the long night's end, that we ourselves are living in the world it happened in when it first happened, that we ourselves, opening a stall, a latch thrown open countless times before, might find them breathing there, foreknown, the child bedded in straw, the mother kneeling over him, the husband standing in belief he scarcely can believe, in light that lights them from no source we see, an April morning's light, the air around them joyful as a choir. We stand with one hand on the door, looking into another world that is this world, the pale daylight coming just as before, our chores to do, the cattle all awake, our own white, frozen breath hanging in front of us. And we are here as we have never been before, sighted as not before, our place holy, although we knew it not.
It was very nice.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode. We want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays. I just want to remind you that you can find us online at www.membershippod.com. You can find us on Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook, all at Membership Pod. Also, Want to give a shout out to the Rabbit Room. We are a proud member of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network, and you can find other great podcasts at rabbitroom.com/podcasts. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We do hope you have a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.